I drove 7 hours for New Year's. My sister opened the door, laughed, and said, "This year is just for family." I turned around without a word and cut off every payment I paid. By sunrise, I had 68 missed calls and one text, "We need to talk." I drove 7 hours that New Year's Eve, praying for a fresh start with my sister, my imported champagne buckled in like a VIP. But the moment she opened the door, a single sentence rearranged my entire world. Then, her husband texted me. I was 32, and on December 31st, I white-knuckled that 7-hour drive through a mountain blizzard. The gifts in the trunk crinkled whenever I hit black ice, forcing me to fight the wheel. The radio hosts, annoyingly cheerful, counted down to a new year I hoped would be different. I told myself this would be the year things softened between me and Olivia. The year I stopped being the distant relative, the one with the long drive and short phone calls, and became family again. Really family, the kind where you don't even think about who pays for what. That morning, Olivia had sent a chirpy text, confirming she expected me, and even specifying the champagne brand. It felt less like a request and more like an order. I chose not to overthink it. Sometimes, that's the only way you keep driving when the snow turns the sky into a white sheet and the road vanishes. I rehearsed my hello, even a joke about the champagne costing more than my winter tires. The GPS cheerfully announced my arrival, and I turned into their heated driveway, passing the gleam of Daniel's new SUV, sitting there like a trophy. Suddenly, their house felt taller than it used to, taller than my memories, taller than me. My own apartment, where the heat thumps like an old heart and the windows sweat when I boil pasta, felt miles away. I balanced 3 light gifts and the champagne, telling myself the heavier things could wait until after the first hug, the first laugh, the first, "I'm glad you made it." Which, I now know, is a dangerous thing to tell yourself if you're wrong about the hug and the laugh and the gladness. Olivia opened the door fast, like she'd been watching. She looked immaculate, the kind of polished perfection that takes time and effort, makeup precise, hair like a magazine cover. She smiled, and I recognized it from childhood, the smile right before a correction. "Oh, honey, you actually drove," she said, with the exact pitch you'd use for a child's art project. Then she tilted her head, held the pose, and delivered the line I'll probably remember until I forget my own name, "This year's just for family." It's a simple sentence until you're the person on the doorstep holding a bottle that cost more than your winter coat and gifts wrapped to match their decor. She'd even posted about it on social media. I waited for the laugh, for the wink, for the correction that would tell me I'd misunderstood. But it didn't come. Only the silence. I stared at this version of my sister, realizing the old one had moved out a long time ago without a forwarding address. I did the bravest, quietest thing I'd ever done. I turned around. I walked back through the clean, expensive air of their neighborhood, where the snowplows come on a schedule. I put the champagne on the passenger seat with more force than I meant to, and the bottle rolled onto the floor like it was trying to escape. I drove away into weather that felt honest. 15 minutes later, at a red light in Springfield, Illinois, my phone buzzed. I let myself imagine it was Olivia, saying, "Come back." I messed up. I panicked. But the universe didn't get the memo. I saw Daniel's name, and the message previewed as if the phone wanted to protect me. Why would that loser even show up? A lineup of laughing emojis, a carnival of contempt, plus some live commentary about my car and my life. He'd meant to send it to a group chat about me, a phrase that should never exist. Instead, he sent it to me. Something inside me locked into place, an old door finally finding its latch. I pulled off at the first gas station, parking under a buzzing light that made everything look like a memory amplified. The snow fell in quiet flakes, muting the world so I could hear what I was thinking. And what I was thinking was this: for 5 years since our parents passed, I had been the quiet financial scaffolding behind their house, their phones, sometimes even their groceries. My name was on policies they liked to pretend were magic, my fingers typed passwords they treated like weather. The math of love had slowly become the math of keeping them afloat. I'd told myself grief and transition come with invoices, that's just life. I hadn't noticed how easily they had come to expect it, without ever saying thank you or "we'll take it from here." I opened the insurance app and removed a vehicle that wasn't mine from a policy that was. I watched the confirmation email land like a clean, little bell. Then I opened the phone carrier app, staring at the family plan, the extra lines, the premium features I didn't use. I untied that knot as carefully as I had tied it. Another confirmation bell rang. Then the autopays, subscriptions, meal deliveries, cloud storage, home security, all the invisible conveniences quietly routed through me were rerouted back to them. I sat there, adding the numbers like a clerk in a novel, and realized the total was the price of my life being smaller than it needed to be. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, the sensation of my own spine. I drove again when my hands stopped shaking, stopping at a diner where the lights were warm in a way no chandelier can imitate. A server named Chloe asked if I wanted coffee, and I said yes. She refilled it twice before I asked, the kind of kindness that costs time and earns loyalty. "You driving through all this?" she asked, her tone concerned, not judgmental. "Change of plans," I said. "Then start with dessert," she replied. And I did, because a stranger suggested it kindly. I went home after that, to my small apartment that fit me and the life I could pay for without resentment. I put my phone face down. It buzzed and buzzed like a trapped insect, and I let it tire itself out, because the emergency was not mine anymore. I watched a movie I'd seen before, for the comfort of knowing what happens next. At 11:37 p.m., the first missed call from Olivia arrived. They stacked up like flimsy chairs, 68 of them by morning. It was like the world trying to break down a door that didn't exist. On January 1st, I brewed coffee, made breakfast, and read the message Olivia finally sent: "We need to talk." I replied with a sentence that fit in my mouth and didn't make me flinch. I said that family, by her definition, was just for family, and that I was going to spend my money and my time on people who wanted me, not my wallet. Then I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and wrote boundaries on a sticky note, placing it on my bathroom mirror like a new rule of gravity. The first 3 days of January felt like stepping out of a pool I didn't know I'd been treading in, the kind where your arms are too tired to notice until they stop. I opened a new savings account with the quiet ceremony you reserve for planting trees. I went for morning runs that were more honest shuffles, but the rhythm of my feet on the frozen sidewalk made a metronome out of the cold. I researched cars I could afford that wouldn't be punchlines in someone else's text thread, and apartments with windows that faced light instead of a brick wall. I calculated how long it would take to have an emergency fund that deserved the name. On January 3rd, Olivia showed up at my place unannounced. Apologies that require planning also require sincerity, and she was low on both. I saw her from the window, sitting in the idling car, her makeup 2 shades too heavy for morning, her coat signaling she had dressed for an outcome she believed in. She knocked softly first, then harder. When I opened the door, she looked past me automatically, inventorying what I owned, the way you do when assessing leverage. I moved aside and let her in, because I wanted to hear what story she would tell when the old story stopped working. She started with, "I was overwhelmed hosting," slid into, "It was a stupid joke," and parked in, "You're being too sensitive." I let her do the full loop, because interrupting a performance only encourages improvisation. When she paused for applause that wasn't coming, I asked the question I'd carried since the doorstep: if it was a joke, who was supposed to laugh? I didn't know what comedian opens with this year's Just for Family to a brother who drove 7 hours through a storm. She pivoted to a new script about private family drama she was protecting me from, the kind of phrase you deploy when the facts aren't on your side. Then I asked about Daniel's text. She said he'd been drinking, as if alcohol were a ventriloquist and he the puppet. I told her drunk words or sober thoughts with the volume turned up. She stared at me like I had used a language she didn't speak. She didn't mention money, which was interesting the way a missing painting is interesting, because you can see the outline where it hung. She changed tactics, asking what it would take to move past this, start fresh, and get back to normal. I told her we had, in fact, started fresh, and the new normal was the one where I didn't pay for her life. You can tell when a sentence hits, because the face across from you tries not to show the math it's doing. She asked if I was really going to punish her for a misunderstanding. I told her it wasn't punishment, it was reallocation. A word that belongs to budgets, but also works fine for love. I said that if I wasn't family enough to step across her threshold holding the champagne she requested, I wasn't family enough to be a line item in her monthly plan. She cycled through the greatest hits: guilt, anger, nostalgia, future promises with no dates. I answered each one with a short sentence, because long ones are where loopholes hide. Eventually, she left, because the door that would open wasn't mine. It was inside her, and she didn't have the key yet. A week later, I got a call from Susan, Daniel's mother. She has the kind of voice built for asking hard questions without making anyone defensive. She said Olivia had asked their side of the family for help because of unexpected bills. Susan wanted to know if there was a storm she should prepare for. I told her the version of the truth that fit into respect, that boundaries around money had been clarified, and that adults were now paying for what adults used. Susan sighed the sigh of women who have managed men's messes for decades, thanked me for my time, and didn't pressure me, because mature people know pressure distorts more than it persuades. Around the same time, my inbox became a parade of messages from mutual acquaintances, all variations on "I heard there was a misunderstanding, could we all sit down together?" I ignored most of them, because narratives are hydras, and if you feed them, they grow more heads. But I met Sarah for coffee, because she's known our family long enough to remember when my mother could fix a mood with a casserole and a look. I told Sarah the short version that still took a long time, including the accidental text and the years of quiet financial help. She covered her mouth like she was trying to keep a laugh from escaping, but it was shock. She offered to mediate out of reflex. I said no, because you cannot mediate geometry into changing. Lines are either parallel or they intersect, and this one wasn't going to. In late January, I saw Chloe again. I'd started stopping by the diner after morning runs, partially for the coffee, and partially for the way she said my name like it wasn't a problem to solve. She asked how the new year was treating me. I told her sometimes freedom is a room with your own bills on the counter. She said, "That'll be 12.95. And we both laughed, because jokes and truth share a table more often than we admit. February arrived, wearing gray like a uniform. One evening, my phone lit up with Daniel's name. I let it go to voicemail. But then I listened, because curiosity is a poor locksmith, but it still jiggles the handle. He sounded like a man calling from the bottom of a well, echoey, humble, careful, apologizing for the text, calling it a dumb moment that doesn't represent who I am. Then he slid into the ask, "Is there any chance you could turn back on just one or two things? Maybe the phone plan or the car insurance until we get through this?" He promised gratitude, public, even meaningful inclusion. I called him back, wanting to move this from voicemail to daylight. I thanked him for the apology, and told him the accidental text had simply confirmed the tone I had sensed for years. Then I asked him a question that sounded small and was not: how long have the jokes been going on? The silence that followed was the first true thing he gave me. When he found words, he called them occasional comments that were affectionate, which is what people say when they want to varnish a chair that's already broken. I told him I hoped they would find a way through their finances, and that I would not be part of that solution, because I had finally learned the difference between an ATM and a brother. He said he understood, in the tone of a man who did not. When we hung up, I felt a quiet click. The second in 2 months. In late February, an envelope arrived with my name in Olivia's handwriting, which has always looked like she expected the paper to obey her. Inside were 3 pages that read like a reconciliation speech co-written by nostalgia and fear. Childhood memories bullet-pointed for effect, admissions of terrible mistakes, promises of future holidays where everyone listens and nobody raises their voice. While some sentences rang with genuine regret, the melody underneath was a request for me to reconsider the money. The car note was a wolf at the door, and the utilities had started leaving voicemails with a different tone. I read it twice, because I am not a monster, and because grief is still a character in our story. Then I put it in a folder with other important papers, because not responding can be a kind of response when the person you love most is the person you're learning how not to save. March didn't so much arrive as unspool. I signed a lease on a larger apartment with windows that remembered light. I bought a car that started even when the temperature tried to be clever. I sat with a banker who explained interest rates with a pen he clearly liked, and opened a high-yield account for an emergency fund, which is less glamorous than a vacation and more like oxygen than it sounds. On a Saturday, I drove to Nashville, Tennessee, a city I didn't know yet, and bought myself dinner at a place with a wine list printed on real paper. I watched a movie in a theater where the sound makes your ribs vibrate. I felt something like sadness and something like pride, and realized the two can share a table without arguing. In April, I ran into Sarah at the farmer's market. She said Olivia had started telling a version of the story where I had pulled the rug out from under them without warning. I said that people under rugs rarely notice who's been vacuuming. Sarah laughed hard, then said softly that she was proud of me. I took the compliment like medicine, not candy. In May, I told Chloe about the new place. She said, "Bring by a photo." And I did. She said the couch looked comfortable in the morally correct way. I told her I had a plant still alive after 4 weeks. She high-fived me like we had won a small championship. The regulars at the counter argued about baseball and politics in the way that means no one is actually angry. For the first time in years, a public room felt like a living room I was allowed to sit in without performing. Summer came without incident, which is my new favorite way for seasons to arrive. I learned that if you stop marking your calendar with crises, your days start to fill themselves in with smaller, kinder things: a friend's backyard, a library hold text, a Saturday spent changing the oil on a car that will not betray you for a joke. I took a long weekend to drive to a national park I had only seen on other people's screens, and stood at a lookout where tourists whisper without knowing why. I thought about my parents, and the way my mother would have pressed her hand into my chest like she was checking for a fever when something upset me. I said out loud that I missed them, which made a hiker glance over like he had overheard a prayer. In September, a mutual friend told me Olivia and Daniel had sold the SUV and downsized their place, and that they were figuring it out. I nodded, because adults can do hard things when the thermostat of their life is set to reality. I did not feel triumph, only a quiet relief that the story might turn into 2 parallel lines that run separately but cleanly. In October, months after my last reply, Olivia sent a photo of a handwritten budget on a yellow pad, a sentence beneath it that read, "I'm learning." I stared at it for a long minute, then put the phone face down and went for a run. Forgiveness is not a switch you flip, it's a dimmer that you adjust when your hands are steady. And my hands were not steady that morning. Winter returned, as it does. On a day when the sky was the same color as the street, Chloe spotted me through the diner window and waved me in, pouring coffee before I sat. We talked about nothing in that luxurious way that means everything is finally not on fire. She said, "You look different." I said, "I think I do." She said, "Good, different." And I said, "Thank you." Because sometimes the bravest sentence is the shortest. I have not spoken to my sister since late winter, except for the occasional administrative text about estate paperwork that still wanders across our family's landscape like a lost dog. I don't expect a holiday invitation, and I don't expect to send a bottle of champagne anywhere except my own table. When I think about that night on the doorstep, I try not to replay it like evidence, but instead like a scene where a character learns the thing the audience already knew, that being needed is not the same as being loved, and being valuable to someone is not the same as being valued by them. The difference between those 2 sentences is where my life currently lives. I've learned that boundaries aren't fences to keep people out, but floor joists that keep you standing. That money isn't love, but the misuse of it can feel like betrayal. That silence is a message, and sometimes it's a mercy. On a morning in early spring when the good sun returns, I plan to sit in the park with a thermos and a book, and let the city happen around me. If I see Chloe on a run, I hope she waves. And if she doesn't, that will be fine, too. Because the point of this story isn't that the world rearranged itself to suit me, but that I finally rearranged my life to suit what I know to be true. If you're reading this because you think you might be the scaffolding for someone else's house and they forgot to invite you inside, consider this both a warning and an invitation. You are allowed to step down. The house will creak and complain, and maybe a few fixtures will fall, but the ground under your own feet will stop moving. There is a kind of peace only available to people who stop apologizing for choosing themselves. What would you have done on that doorstep?